Hi everyone, we'll be starting the event now. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening for our event. My name is Jody from SGInnovate, and today we're very happy to partner with Ogilvy on today's panel discussion on behavioral science. So for those of you who are not familiar with SGInnovate, we actually believe that Singapore has the resources and capabilities to solve deep problems through the use of deep tech. And part of our knowledge sharing efforts are through events such as the one you're here for today. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic over to Pierre from Ogilvy to give an introduction about the event.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'm Pierre. I'm a senior partner at Ogilvy Consulting and in charge of innovation for the region. I'm very, very glad having all of you tonight, but I'm very excited having such good people and good panelists with us to discuss about this next creative chapter and how we need to reinvent segmentation. So please welcome on stage our three big speakers and panelists. So Christopher Grave, Sam, Rob, please. I will just give you the mic so you can introduce yourself. You are going to do it much better than I do. Thanks for coming. I will just give you the mic first so that you can introduce yourself, and then I have a few questions, of course, to facilitate and guide you in that discussion. I'm very excited having that discussion with you because I had the chance to discuss a bit with you the last week, and I know you have lots of things to bring to the audience tonight.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out. I just got here, flew in from Washington, D.C. a few hours ago. I was 27 years old when I left. I aged on the flight, I'm sorry. I used to live in Singapore. I was one of the founders of CNBC television here, and then joined Ogilvy, which is, as you know, a large advertising, public relations, interactive, social, digital, and consulting agency. And for the last several years have been specializing only in behavioral science, which is a combination of behavioral economics, social psychology, cognitive neuroscience, and all it means is everything we thought we knew about how to change people's minds was totally wrong.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Som, the CEO of AI Palette. I'm a marketeer by training, salesperson by expertise, and passionate about product innovation. Worked across all kinds of food product innovation, starting from fruit juices to fried chicken, except tobacco because I don't smoke, but pretty much done it all. And at AI Palette, we help the FMCG companies with their new product innovation, helping them to launch successful products faster and better.
Hi, I'm Rob Gilby, CEO and founder of Blue Hat Ventures. That's my own investment and consulting firm. I'm also a board member of the Infocom Media Development Authority and chairman of the Singapore Media Festival. I've been in Asia about 24 years now. Yeah, I came when I was 5 years old. Most of that has been spent in media. I spent 12 years at Disney and 6 years at Turner Broadcasting.
Thank you. I think it's going to be a great panel because we have apart, knowing that they are good friends, because I just realized Rob and Chris met before, a media connection. But I know that they have very, very different expertise, and they are going to bring the voice of different players in the ecosystem. So the media owners, the startup ecosystem, the consulting and advertising business. And I think it's good to have the voice of all those three experts to really think about what is the next creative chapter, how we need to reinvent segmentation, which is at the heart of what we do in advertising and in marketing. So I think, everyone does persona and customer journey. I'm sure you heard about, persona and customer journey if you are here today. But the key question is, what if they have become outdated? And I'd like to, quote David Ogilvy. We do a lot of, David Ogilvy quote in our business because he was very inspiring. And David Ogilvy started in research and complained, consumers don't think how they feel. They don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say, which is very, very true. So considering this Ogilvy quote, I would like to raise this first question to you, Chris. Could you explain us why we need to reinvent segmentation? And is it relevant to all sectors, to all categories? Is the segmentation too hyped, or is it dead? Do you see our bias and heuristic may evolve or change over time?
Yes, yes, maybe, no, and yes. First of all, why do segmentation? If you look at a corollary or an analogy for this, think of medicine, think of oncology, cancer treatment, and you see how we used to just sort of treat all humans the same and hope for the best, and some would react and some wouldn't, positively, negatively, but then with the advent of doing the full human genome, you can target the therapies to the person's genome, totally personalized for a better outcome. But we're still doing communications like we're doing brain surgery with a hammer and a chisel, instead of using more sophisticated approaches. So the reason I think we're totally outdated and we have new ways of doing deeper understanding and segmentation is we've been treating humans as though we all are doing, you know, a government agency where we come out with, you know, a message to get you all to change your behavior. When I first moved to Singapore in 1993, I remember the banners would go up. Speak Mandarin, it helps. Brush your teeth. You know, and these were the traditional kinds of messaging. But now look at what's going on in the world. Look at whole groups of people who don't believe climate change is real, or if they do, they don't care. Look at how information has totally failed if you're trying to get somebody to quit smoking. How education and information doesn't make people vaccinate their children. You can have a vaccination that will protect you from 6 kinds of cancer, and many will not take it. These are not things answered by rational explanations, such as, let's try a better message. What they are answered by is understanding what makes you, you, and him, and how you might be very different, and how I might reframe the communications for you and differently for you. And the tools to do that now are here. They had been deep in the scientific community, but marketers didn't even know what to Google. I mean, if you were trying to get somebody to buy an annuity for insurance, would you have Googled hyperbolic discounting? No way. So part of the problem was language. How do we reach deeply into science, translate that into something all of us can use? And that's what we've been doing for a decade with tens of thousands of studies, so that now we're able to decode humans by personality, by worldview, and by really cool things like each one of you I could test and figure out whether you're an internal or external locus of control, whether you make things happen or things happen to you. Hugely important if you're trying to change behavior for health or anything else. Now, Pierre asked about what does it work for? The easiest, fastest is health and well-being and financial. These are areas that have understood behavioral economics and behavioral science, but it also is working on things like redoing all crisis management through a lens of behavioral science, employee engagement through a lens of behavioral science, and yes, even selling, because we can now figure out whether you're a hedonic shopper or a utilitarian shopper and completely change the approach to you based on your personality.
Thank you. I think I really like the image, you know, about this new segmentation. Like, how do you see as a brand the world, but how would you have to see how people, you know, see you? And I would love to understand from you, with your experience in big data and artificial intelligence, and maybe you can explain as well, you know, what is AI Palette first, so that people could really, you know, do the connection. Do you think we can leverage big data to access such deep cognitive segmentation and understand what really makes the people, you know, how they behave, what they would like to get from a brand, rather than always, you know, putting them in a box and in a cluster, which is like the basic social demographic segmentation? Can you access such deep insights, and are you already into that space with your product?
So traditionally, the companies would do a traditional market research using a questionnaire where they would reach out to 100 or 1,000 people. and it was difficult to scale beyond that. But the problem with that approach is that with 100 people as a reference, you don't get a window into the lives of the millions of people. That is the advantage which is provided by big data. Using data points which runs into millions and seemingly unrelated data points in the form of the online footprint left by the users, and combining it with the internal company data in the form of the CRM data or the loyalty data, you can form a personality of the person. And then using predictive analytics, you can actually predict what kind of product he's likely to buy, what kind of messages he will react to, and also what kind of product or service you should be tailoring it for them. And this helps us in going beyond the usual kind of segmentation, which is just by age, gender, and the income group. You can go much deeper, and you can actually create products based on micro segments. And this is actually the unique time in our life today where probably we'll not see any more of these billion-dollar brands. Those days are almost gone. Now we'll probably be seeing more of like hundreds of million-dollar brands. And that's because consumers are looking for more and more personalization and micro-personalization.
So how far can you go into this segmentation? So Chris was mentioning, the internal locus of control or the external locus of control, this type of personality traits. Can you go until this type of information?
Yeah, actually. So if you go at a user level, you can identify and form a personality of that person. You can identify what his worldview is like, what things motivates him to buy a particular kind of product. And these, in turn, can be used by the brands and the marketeers to personalize a message, product, or a solution for them. And the kind of work that we do at AI Palette is that we are currently working with the food FMCG companies to identify what products they should be creating for their consumers. And by looking at the food-related data sets, and looking at the consumer footprints on blogs, forums, social media, restaurant review sites, or recipes, we can classify the needs of the people. So if they like a particular kind of product, is there a sensory need behind it? Is there a functional need behind it? Is it something which makes them in losing weight? Is it something which helps them in look beautiful? And finally, is there an emotional need which is help them, which is asking them to consume those products? And thus, we use those insights to help the companies to segment better and create products which will ultimately be liked by their customers.
Are you working with advertising company at that time? I was asking you the question the last week.
Right. So at this point of time, we are not working with advertising or the media agencies, but we definitely have it in our roadmap. And the media and the advertising agencies are actually a logical extension of our customer base. We currently help the brands to create products for their consumers. We can use the same data to identify what kind of messages those brands should be communicating to their consumers so that the consumers understand better and love the messages which come from the brands.
Good. Rob, I know you are here the voice of the media owners, and I'd love to hear your point of view on how media owners consider behavior science in their product development today.
Well, I think media owners are consumer-facing. As with any other consumer product company, they will want to know what the consumers think. So the better they understand the consumer, the better they can sell their product. Historically, if you were a broadcast media or even a movie cinema distributing films from movie cinemas, you had very limited information. So back to Som's comment about the data set. The data set was quite limited and not complex enough to truly get a deep understanding of the consumer. The other challenge that media owners used to have was the speed of gathering that data. A lot of the data we used to do at Disney that was really rich data took months to gather because it was very qualitative based as well, and lots of in-person interviews. And we started gathering social data too, but there were some initial challenges in gathering the social data, which a lot of work has been done. The more complete the analysis, the better informed the creators of media, the curators of media are to creating services. And so it's introducing more of the science aspects of behavior science and less of the human judgment. But it's still, the human judgment is still there. mean, if you take, for example, Netflix, the obvious one is their movie recommendation algorithm. So that takes into account a huge number of data sets. Not only their data sets, but I had a ex-Google executive tell me that Netflix knows how to use Google search better than Google does in gathering their data sets for their customers. So it's part of gathering their data sets to make those recommendation engines. But there are other parts you may be less familiar with, like the thumbnails that are on your the carousel. So those thumbnails are personalized based upon the information they have about you. And at the end of the day, your buying decision for an entertainment product in particular is not a logical one, purely logical cognitive. There's a lot of work that's been done on the emotional aspects of cognitive sort of behavior science. And those emotional aspects that drive a lot of what drives entertainment. So you may not think it, but you will be influenced by the imagery you see. And so the more effective the understanding of the consumer, the more effective the deployment of this science, the better Netflix can program to do what they ultimately want to do. Get more subscribers, get you to pay more consistently and not churn, and create that service more relevant globally. Because a company like Netflix wants to be globally relevant. And to do that, and Chris, I think you'll remember from the early days, of satellite and cable TV, it was quite hard to customize television channels to each country around the world. You start by languaging. No, that's not enough. People want different programming. We introduce different programming, and that doesn't fit. What's our brand? There were lots of these challenges in customization. And so the bigger Netflix's data set, the better they can adapt that to every single person rather than being the traditional broadcast world.
I totally agree with that. And one of the amazing things now is, instead of having to get to each of you to interview you and debrief you, a really fascinating, sometimes creepy aspect is that we can infer who you are from what you like. So if you remember the scandal of Cambridge Analytica on Facebook, there's an article I've written, you can Google it, it's on Harvard Business Review under my name and personality marketing. And what they were after doing was a kind of segmentation by personality, but also if I can't get to you to give you a personality test, what they had adopted, I'll use the term loosely, from Cambridge University, were findings that with as few as 10 Facebook likes, I can know your personality the same degree of accuracy as your work colleagues, having never met you, seen you, anything. But with just over 200 likes, I can know your personality with the same accuracy as your spouse, having never met you. So you think about outreach or configuration, whether it's the visual part, like the thumbnail, the tiles, or it's the messaging, or if it's political campaigning or what have you, inference is now becoming huge. And with that, one of the most amazing things I've seen, because you're using machine learning and AI to digest posts on Instagram to infer your personality. But one of the most amazing pieces of research I've seen was a correlation, a prediction. What do you think is the single best predictor of future heart disease by microgeography? If you were looking at a country or a map and you were saying, what is the single best predictor that in 20 years this postal code is going to have terrible heart disease and this one not so much? What would you guess would be the predictors for heart disease 20 years from now? Walmart. Interesting. Interesting. What were some of the things? You'd think maybe smoking, sedentary behavior, poor nutrition, things like that. Fast food. Actually, the single best predictor so far against all of those, and better than all of those combined, is the language used on Twitter. That by having artificial intelligence parse combinations of words that correlate to very bad habits and behavior, they made a predictive map, a heat map, and then compared it to death certificates from the Centers for Disease Control in America with an 80% correlation. So the ways that we can now glean who you are from words you choose, images you choose, and combinations especially, not just individual things. But that's why Spotify and Amazon are so powerful right now, because it's not just who you think you are, who you say you are. It's like your DNA through e-commerce.
Well, I think, so after having understood a bit more, this hyper-personalization that we could really get in any business, So you use big data to really recommend to big FMCG, what is the next product they need to create. Chris explained us here, this segment of one and how we need to really consider the DNA of our consumers. And Rob mentioned here, how media owners are really thinking about the hyper-segmentation and really always, and I like what you said about this is not only about the content, but the services they need to deliver to consumers, because media owners are more and more into the service space, and of course they need to understand customers at this level of depth to really provide them what they want. Now I'd like to, beyond this understanding, which is how to prepare what you are going to do, let's talk a bit more about how to build this next product, this new content, this entertainment content, based on what we know. Because it's a bit weird, but at the time we are considering the segment of one, does that mean that we can, that we need to think about a product or service that is only dedicated to you or to you, and that would be completely different? And how can we create some content or services or product that finally, are considering we need to do it at a manufacturing level? You cannot just, just invest in R&D and do such production for one person. So how do you see this hyper-segmentation impacting the product or content production in the advertising space, in the product space, into the media and entertainment space?
First of all, I think that we would not do it for one. I think that we do it for individuals at scale. What we don't know yet until we test, depending on the issue, the service, the context, is how they cluster. But the thing that's a huge falsehood is that every one of you thinks you're an individual. And there's a wonderful Monty Python scene in the life of Brian where he's telling the followers who are trying to make him the next Messiah, he's trying to tell them, you don't need me, you don't need anybody else, you are all individuals. And they all chant together, yes, we are all individuals. So when I say about the DNA, the thing is that we will find clusters and groups so that we're not going to make 7 billion different versions of a show. We will then make, 2, 3, 4 different versions, perhaps, of content or content engagement, depending on how we find these clusters shake out. If you have this long tail of people being really that different, I think that would be very abnormal. Usually they cluster into fairly large areas.
Thank you.
Yeah. So coming to the consumer products, so the problem is tackled in 2 ways. So when it comes to the health and wellness segment, there is a personalization at an individual level, where companies are asking users to take a picture of their face and send it to the beauty and makeup company. And this is your skin complexion and the problem that have your skin. They customize that makeup for you, and then you apply on it. Similarly, for the wellness products, based on your gene, your blood test, they create the supplements for you, and then you can consume it on a regular basis. That's one part. But now coming to the big FMCG companies, they cannot personalize at an individual level. So then it looks at clusters, the way Chris mentioned, and finding those micro clusters, they try to create products which will appeal to those particular groups of people. Similarly, for services, it can be taken to an individual personal level based on your historical data, your preferences, the data that company already have, and matching it with the other people in the similar group. They can customize the experiences for you.
So when I think about products for the entertainment industry, I think about a couple of different parameters. One of them is traditional media companies and digital native media companies. The other parameter is professionally produced content and curation and user-generated. And the last is, what is the business model? So if it's very ad transactional, product commerce driven versus subscription direct to consumer. And it changes how they're incorporating data and AI is slightly different in each of those companies. So I take a couple of examples. Disney is a traditional company. They have data, historical data, but when they gather that data, it wasn't gathered for digital platforms. It didn't have that in mind. It's not a digital-first company. It's embraced technology throughout its history, but it's now having to gather data and put data into a structure that's supported, proper data stacks that support the AI algorithms they want to build over the top. A couple of examples where they're doing that really well. The theme parks. So if you go to the Florida theme parks, you get a Magic Band pass. It's a very simple RFID product, but it has a lot of information about you. It's very permission-based. You know it has that information. It tells you where you spend your money, which rides you're on, where you are at in the park. It's your door key. It's your electronic wallet. It's very rich data on your buying habits, your consumption habits, and it helps Disney better understand you as a customer and therefore better personalize your service. Over time, as they gather a better data set, they'll be able to use that to customize routes in the park, to change the structures of how they actually organize the various events through the park. So there's an example of a very physical example of taking data and analytics and using that to predict behaviors in the park. The other one Disney's doing, is not yet a commercial product, but the Disney Research Division has been working on, is facial recognition in movie theaters, to look at your emotional reaction to movies. So they started gathering the data to see at which point in the movie you laugh, which point you cry, which point you're happy, you're sad, and they're able to roll it, much as similar to the data sets you were talking about, Chris, they're able to roll up that data and predict how you're going to respond to the rest of the movie. So it's not yet a commercial product. I have to say that because it requires rolling it out with other groups. But they've been conducting the research to be able to better understand the consumer, therefore create better movies, using that data to create better Marvel movies, better Disney movies.
And do you think we may reach a stage where we may access and use these emotional data to adapt in real time the story or the narrative or content to really engage more with the audience?
Well, movie theaters, traditional movie theaters, are a little harder to do that. When you have immersive media, VR and AR, that's a little easier to interact real time. But I was going to move on to the digital native platforms that have been gathering data since the beginning. Netflix is the obvious example I mentioned a little earlier on. But some of the most exciting examples are actually in China. So I don't know how many of you have heard of a platform called iQIYI, spelled I-Q-I-Y-I. It's a very big company. It has nearly, last time I keep losing count, 80 million, 90 million paid subscribers and 600 million monthly average users. So they're quite a huge platform, and they have rolled out AI all across their platform. So an example of how they're using AI is what they call intelligent creation. They use it in casting. So they scan literally millions of images of the most popular talent that is already popular across social media, across their own platform. It could be Chinese talent, Korean talent, and they do facial analysis. And in their casting process, they match potential cast with the most popular facial talent. They use it for script analysis, and they're using it as part of the production process as well. There's another great platform, which is more a global platform, called Wattpad. I don't know whether any of you are aspiring writers. If you want to be a writer, Wattpad is a wonderful platform, has about 70 million subscribers worldwide. And basically, you upload your stories. And you have a following, you get immediate feedback and engagement. But Wattpad is gathering a ton of data with that. And so what they do is they've tied up with some production companies, TV and film production companies, to make movies. And for the first time, they're able to, in their script development process, when they commission a book, they're able to get interactive feedback on not only the book itself, but the chapters, the characters. There's emotional data on how people responded using the neuro-linguistic programming to how people emotionally respond to certain characters. So when they write a script for the movie production, they're better equipped for the creative process because they have all of that feedback. They can even use it in an iterative process. So I'd just say that a lot of the new platforms are using the analytics to change the way they do their planning. Remember I mentioned traditionally create and push was the model? Now it's very iterative, much more like the tech world where you create a product, you launch it, you get some feedback, you learn, you change, and you keep iterating.
So I think it brings me to the next question to Som. I think we can really consider here that we would love to learn more, what people, what they would rationally and emotionally love, and have access to this rational data or emotional data. How do you access more to these emotional components? How do you consider these emotional components you were explaining in the theater and production industry? And does it mean that we need to connect more with IoT, with the IoT industry? Does it mean that we need to consider more like facial recognition to understand more how people would emotionally react to anything? How would you consider this in your business today? And maybe if you can explain as well the different type of machine learning or related technology you would use in both the rational and emotional data analytics.
Right, so there are multiple ways companies are trying to deal with that particular challenge. So one of the ways is like using IoT, where they see the brain signals of the people when they're consuming a particular drink or a product. One of the major challenges with the traditional consumer research is that people don't really tell how they feel. Because when they know that they're being observed, they try to give a more favorable answers. But your brain doesn't lie. So by looking at the brain signals when you're testing a particular product or when you're reading a particular concept, they track the brain signals and they truly know what and how you're perceiving that particular product. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way is looking at the facial recognition where you are consuming a particular product. They see how your facial expression changes, going back to a minute level, how your face or your eyebrow is changing. And then to do it at a more mass scale, people look at image analytics, where they look at the pictures of the people when they're consuming a particular product, how they are consuming it, looking at a much bigger scale, try to identify their emotional changes based on those particular parameters. And finally, natural language processing, when people give feedback about a particular product or a particular service, you can analyze them and then get an understanding of the rational and the emotional reason behind those consumption. And the good things about AI is that it is able to capture and see patterns which a human brain would not have been able to. So those huge data points, AI finds a pattern. And the good thing is that we human beings are quite predictable. Because of our cognitive behavior, we follow a particular pattern. And by identifying that pattern, AI then predicts what we should be doing next to meet the emotional and the rational needs of the consumers.
So a caution I would give about any of the brain scans, and they're used a couple of different kinds. There's the EEG, very low cost, but very blunt. They have very huge areas. They're not very precise, versus functional MRI, which is extremely precise, but has a little bit of a lag. And what it really measures, just so you're aware, when people say things like your brain lights up or something like this, no, it doesn't. What it measures is blood oxygenation. It means that when you're using part of your brain, it uses oxygen, and then it calls for replacement of oxygen. And what the scan sees is the replacement of the oxygen, which implies that that part of the brain is active. Now, where you have to be careful and where all neuroscience uses the term correlates, not cause, because they've yet to prove that when you see part of the brain becoming active simultaneous to something else, that that is the cause. They just happen at the same time. But if you take that on board as a caveat, it's still really fascinating stuff that you can figure out from, to your point exactly, I don't trust any consumer research anymore when you ask people why they did something, why they liked something. Because even if they could tell you, which they usually can't, they're worried about the social dynamics, the impression management. So I believe almost nothing when you do focus groups and ask people for things like that. On the side of emotional versus rational, there's a great behavioral scientist and author named Jonathan Haidt. And he says that reason is the press secretary for emotions. That actually the way your brain works, there are two parts of the brain which must work together for you as a human to make any decision of any kind. And this has been proven and reproduced since the year 2001. The two parts of the brain are like two instruments in a symphony. It's not left and right. One is called the amygdala, which are two little almond-shaped things deep down in your earliest evolved part of the brain, which is the raw fight or flight emotion part of the brain. The second is called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, straight through here, which is more evolved and makes sense of that raw signal from the amygdala. But here's the kicker. One of the two is more powerful than the other. And the emotional governors, the limbic system in the brain, ultimately is the boss for all human decision making. And that's why Jonathan Haidt said, okay, so the boss is the emotion, reason is the press secretary. After your emotions below conscious level decided you were going to buy that car or rent that flat, you then say, well, you know, that car has good safety ratings, good resale value, and I'm getting it with 2 years off on the license, so I'm down to about $27,000 instead of $30,000 on the license. So that was a pretty smart deal. When actually, below conscious level, you know, the emotional part of the brain is going, man, I feel 10 years younger sitting behind the wheel of that car. But the press secretary will come out and explain it to everybody.
Thank you. I think it's great to understand as well how it's going not only to impact the media industry, but the advertising industry. And the reason why I was really excited to get you here is because we are all now, you know, trying to design what might be our next creative chapter, but any company wants to reinvent itself and try to, all the big corporates want to understand what, you know, how their business would look like in 10 years ahead. So considering the advertising business, considering this hyper-personalization and this need to finally leverage this emotional to really engage more with consumers and make them consider your product, how do you see this behavior science and this hyper-segmentation impacting the advertising creative business?
First of all, I think like always in the advertising business, we will go too far and then have to regroup. We will think, oh my God, jump onto it, and there will be some that are scientifically sound and many that are not, to be fair. There will be some that will be fraudulent. There will be some that will be overclaims and overreach. So you'll have to go through that phase. Actual science is less certain than that, and often overturned by subsequent science. And you have to have the stomach for that and not make overreach and overclaims. But with the science that will work, I think what it will end up doing is instead of thinking in a very arrogant way that you and I will go secretly cook up the best advertisement ever, or in a very arrogant way, we'll go to Cannes and we'll win a gold lion for something that never sold anything. Instead, we'll think more like an empathetic doctor, an oncologist, and we'll think, gosh, if I really want to enact this behavior change, sell this product, or change mindsets, I have to first understand what the real biases and barriers are and how you as an individual moderate and mediate those biases. And in an empathetic way, then I will craft that engagement, whether it's an ad, whether it's another human talking to you, whether it's a song or a playlist or a smell. It may be all kinds of ways to engage you, but I'll be thinking more like personalized medicine and less like somebody who wants to win an award.
You just mentioned the different components, the sound, the image, the copywriting that are so important into an ad. Which are the one you see potentially the most impacted in the next 10 years? You mentioned to me in the car before when we were, you mentioned potentially the copywriting, which is certainly the easiest one. Yeah. Which one do you think also may be very complex?
Yeah, so you can, right now, I gave a test to about 350 top executives of communications firms and agencies in New York, and I put up side by side things that humans had written and things that AI had written. Nobody could guess. 350 experts in communication. So at one level, it's kind of shocking and unnerving that you could have artificial intelligence create copy that cannot be distinguished from what humans have created. There are, huge disasters at perhaps writing an entire novel or something that may move you beyond that copy. I think text is already here, though, and companies like Narrative Science write millions of news stories that you will have already read automatically. I think the more difficult ones would come from things like olfactory smell. I think sonar, oral hearing sounds are already here. Spotify, if you gave them permission, would give you a 5-day warning before you were about to have your next depressive episode. That's how much they can link your well-being to your choices in music right now. So I think we're there in sound. We're there in copy. We're there almost, I think, in vision, whether it's creating. You mentioned casting. You can now, if you look at GAN, generative adversarial networking, you can create humans that do not exist, that are completely high resolution, high def humans that do not exist. And I could create your perfect human and separately your perfect human. So I think the visual part is there. I think smell is going to be real tough.
So I know, so you are the deep learning, machine learning expert today, and so I think at the time we want to access more emotion, to really deep dive into these hyper-cognitive segmentation. There is a question of ethics in the data set. And there is the question about how to make it ethically. And in behavior science, there is something important, which is understanding we have all bias. And the big question most of the people have around artificial intelligence is how we can ensure that some of our human bias are not already within the data set, and how can we ensure we have clean data that we can train to get better accurate outcome and ethical outcome. Can I get your point of view on this, and how do you manage your data set, and how do you address that point when you have to convince your FMCG big corporates and clients so that they can rely on your technology?
Right. So the ethics or the personal privacy is, of course, an important point. And the way we look at it is that we look at the trends at a more aggregated level. And basis that, we identify what kind of needs people have at an aggregated level. So you're not looking at you or he or she at a personal level, what you want. We look at more at this group of people, and that group of people, what kind of products they will prefer, what kind of taste they want, what kind of functional benefits they want out of it. And to address the questions related to the data bias, so data is one of the most important things in any AI technology. The technology is only as good as the data that goes in. So we address this problem in multiple ways. So one is that for any particular local level, we look at the local data sources only. So the recent work we did for beverages in Thailand, we look at data which is only in Thai language. Imagine if we just had looked at English in Thai language, it will probably be the tourists and the experts talking. B, we look at data sources from multiple different platforms coming for. So this way we make sure that it's not loaded towards one particular group of people who are heavy users of one platform. So this way we're collecting 5 to 6 different data sources, which becomes more homogeneous and gets rid of the bias. And B, as the number of data point increases, any influence due to the edge cases that slowly fall off. And finally, to make sure that we are not taking into account that the fake data which is being created by the robots or the paid people, we have our own AI technology which tags and filters out the data which is created by the paid sources or the bot-related sources.
Do you have any explainability system as well, so that you can really deep dive into your algorithm and have an understanding on why this outcome, so that you can really, as a human, consider the outcome and finally take a final decision on the importance to consider this outcome.
Right, so the explainability is one of the biggest challenges of the AI algorithm today, especially with the deep learning algorithms. It's a black box, which factor leads to what kind of outcome. So this is something which we are continuously working on and seeing how our algorithm is making what kind of prediction, what is the reasons working behind it.
Rob, I know it's also something that finally you should certainly discuss a lot when you are in the IMDA board meetings, I believe that media owners who are the ones who finally broadcast the news, broadcast the entertainment, what finally make people change their minds, shift their, their minds and change their behaviors over time. We need to be very careful, finally, in how ethically we can use citizen data to finally invent the new entertainment, because finally it's really going to guide those people living in a country in one direction. So is that something you discuss a lot, and how do you think it needs to be addressed at the country level for media owners?
Well, I obviously can't say what we discussed on a board meeting because it's confidential, but I will say this. The personal data protection is a priority not only here in Singapore, but it's a priority everywhere. I think there's one. When we talk about emotional decision-making, keep in mind it's not just the emotional transaction that takes place on the platform, it's the people running the companies that are also emotional. Egos get in the way, personal agendas get in the way. That's the real world that we live in. That's one of the biggest things that slows down execution of a lot of these things. So the reality about protecting personal data is that all of us want that personalization. We want the benefits of the new technology. But ask you, do you really want to share enough data to do that? I got lots of nods there. Do you want to share the data? No, I don't trust what you're going to do with my data. Do you want the benefits of total data? Yeah, of course. So I want this, but I'm not going to give this, And so that's what the attempts, and we're quite early in the process of deploying a lot of these things. Most governments are working through how do we create a legal framework to enable progression. Singapore is very aggressively embracing being a smart nation, training technical skills. SGInnovate exists because of that commitment to trying to benefit the growth of the nation using technology. But at the same time, somehow we have to protect the citizens. So these tools are very, very valuable tools. The work that Chris and the team are doing and that Som's doing, it's way more advanced than we had just a few years ago, let alone 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. 20 years when I started in the media industry, It's advanced very quickly, but it's not complete. And we're quite early in the process. Everybody wants to deploy this. I mean, we talk about the trigger for this was the advertising sector, but the advertising sector has massively changed in the last few years. So, a large part of it in the past would be media buying. That's so automated now, and it's so devalued, by the way, in the process. And so much emphasis has shifted into the creative part of how agencies service their marketing and brand partners. But that process used to be campaign management and campaign design, and if you've watched Mad Men, you'll get excited about all the parts of that process. Now storytelling is a key part of that process. And there are various different ways to do the storytelling. There's the short form storytelling, there's long form, there's brand association, there's agencies within agencies. They're working with professional production people to write stories. And so that's the one part where I think this gathering of the data, the behavioral science behind it is sound, unquestionably sound. It's the deployment that is just happening in a gradual process. And just the last part on that part is, I think Chris outlined exceptionally well how that learning is going. Text is the first phase. We've been doing text, the analytics of the text for a really, really long time, but images, are part of that next phase. Video, we are there, but complex video and complex storytelling, and the emotional aspects of storytelling, because there's ways you can get stories. Story structures are very predictable, by the way. They haven't changed for hundreds of years. But the nuances on the storytelling that make the difference between Avengers Endgame or Game of Thrones, that are worldwide popular, and individual films that work really well for one city or one country, those are the nuances on the storytelling. there's still, if you think about how a person, a story writer or producer or director comes up with that, a lot of that is historical data. No reason why a machine can't eventually gather all of that data, watch all the films that they watched. But it's not just that, it's a combination of their other life experiences up until that point. How was their childhood? How were they bullied at school? Were they motivated? Did they fall in love? Did they have a broken heart? All of these aspects are cumulative data points. As the data gets better and better, and as we have, I think the algorithms are no problem. There are some smart coders coming up with the algorithms, but as the data gets richer and richer, and as people are more comfortable sharing the data, the quality of those very human nuances, I think, will just get better and better. And that's a progressive journey. It's not a start or stop kind of process. That's just my own view.
Yeah. I think for the big gap in the continuum between first finding out who you are as individuals at scale, then making sense of that, then crafting empathetically something that will work for you, but the gap is still on the media buying side. And even though we have programmatic, in my view, bad programmatic, people used to say, you know, it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks. Bad programmatic is putting the spaghetti in a blender, atomizing it, putting it in a fire hose, and spraying it at the wall. And you're still looking to see what sticks. Whereas behavioral science can predictively help you raise the effectiveness. Instead of just seeing what sticks, your starting point is different. The whole approach is different. However, how many of you know about Big Five ocean personality? This is not voodoo. It's a 25-year tested science of personality trait science, right? It's an acronym, OCEAN, O-C-E-A-N, right? So imagine I were to go to buy media, and I go, here's what I want. I'm going to combat obesity. I've got a great weight loss product. Here's what I want to buy. I want to buy high on openness, low on conscientiousness. I want middling on extroversion, introversion. I want low on agreeableness, and I want high on neuroticism. What is that going to cost me? Find a media platform that will sell you that, because they're not equipped to sell media by personality trait. And that's why Cambridge Analytica did what it did, is because if you can't buy it explicitly by personality trait, you buy it by proxies. And so you look for, well, if somebody who is high on openness, low on conscientiousness, et cetera, what do their likes look like from that personality? How do you, like the Twitter story of heart disease? And so this is where AI is helping a lot, is to look for proxies for personalities when there's no explicit way to actually buy media by personality.
And it triggered another thought, a reminder. How many of you subscribe to Amazon Prime Video, the video service? And of those people who are subscribed to that, how many buy products on Amazon? Right. Amazon Prime Video doesn't have to make money, ever. Ever. It's not really there to make money as a video service. It's part of the Amazon flywheel. And they have a lot of data if you're an Amazon, if you buy on Amazon, they have a lot of data on your transactional, but they know nothing about you emotionally, or very little, other than the data of your shopping habits when you're really down. But if they know what you watch, and how each of the metadata of those shows are tagged, they understand a lot more about you. And they're not the only one doing that. If you're a TikTok user, if you are Alibaba, Lazada user, they're all building ecosystems with the data. They're not taking data that you didn't make available to them. You gave them permission to do that. And they're not, if they've got their security properly, they're not sharing that outside. But they're becoming the buying systems. Amazon doesn't need to sell space. It can advertise and promote within. So that's why Amazon moves very aggressively into that. They're a big ecosystem. So think about that next time you're on a video system, not like Netflix, but it's part of a bigger ecosystem. They're understanding you better and better, and they will use that to help sell more transactions.
Yeah. well, I think that was the main topic of all the big conference from the Facebook and the Google a few weeks ago. All so much concern about the data privacy. I think some of them would really have to reinvent the business model because they don't have this Amazon nice service to really capture a consumer's emotion. I'd like to just, end this panel with a few questions about, we discussed about how to understand more the consumers. We discussed about this new production and how we can build new ads, new creative, new product, and new entertainment. So, but the big question is, what do we need to measure as well? What do we need to track? And I really like what Chris said about this efficiency. Should we continue to look at how many lions we got in Cannes, or how we need to reinvent our, tracking business, because it's part of our business as advertiser, and what companies, media owners need to track to really continue to evolve and really serve the consumers with the right product, and what do you think brand would need to track as well when they create new product, new services? Who want to start?
Right. So for us, we have created our own algorithm which uses 29 different factors to predict the future trajectory of a particular food product. Now, we are continuously monitoring the consumer signal that is coming in, and basis that we are predicting the future trajectory. And moving forward, as we have the data, we compare it versus the historic data, and we see what is the variance between our prediction and the actual result out there. And then we go back and try to see out of this 29 factors, which one led to that particular variance. And basis that, again, we optimize the weightage of those different 29 factors. So it is a continuous feedback loop. And because it is a self-learning algorithm, it becomes better and better with every passing day and try to optimize its own prediction so that it's closer to the reality.
So here's a study that was done about vaccinations. Wanting to track, it was a controlled study, track healthcare professionals in their interactions with patients and the ultimate outcome of whether or not the patient vaccinated their child. And so they had an A/B test, and in the A test, they had a very sort of warm bedside manner approach where they were kind of scripted into it, so it would be fairly standardized, and they would say, listen, Som, do you have any concerns at all about vaccinations? Maybe you've read about some side effects or preservatives in vaccinations. I'm here for you, and I'd like to answer any concerns or questions you have about vaccinations. And then Som would rate secretly his experience with me as a doctor, and then longitudinally they would track whether or not he actually vaccinated his children. Now the B group was, I'd say, Pierre, today we're going to give Pierre Jr. These 2 vaccinations, and in 3 weeks we're going to give Pierre Jr. these next 4 vaccinations. So I will speak to you then, but we're going to do 2 today and 3 more in a couple of weeks. So in other words, very dictatorial, very what they called presumptive tone, as opposed to a questioning warm tone. They asked them to rate the experience. He said, what a nice doctor, what a great experience. He said, what a shit. This guy is a tyrant. He didn't want to even talk. Here's the punchline. The vast majority of this group never vaccinated their children. This group, they all did. So you have to be careful what you're measuring. Not intent, not the experience, but the final outcome. Finally, there was a man who was one of the founders of systems thinking that I worked with in the 1980s, the early 1980s, named Russell Ackoff. And he would, in a wonderful way, would lecture me and say, it's better to do the right thing wrong than do the wrong thing right. And I'm like, well, what's the difference? What's the difference? He goes, well, if you do the right thing wrong, eventually you'll get righter and righter at the right thing, having done it wrong. But if you do the wrong thing right, you'll get righter and righter at the wrong thing, which means you're wronger and wronger. So as a little maxim, better to do the right thing wrong than the wrong thing right, and that includes what you choose to measure. So I would look way beyond the attitudinal and experience and look for the outcome measurement that you're looking for. Finally, I would not fall into the trap of last click attribution error, which many in e-commerce do. They say, oh, I've been tracking you. You click there and then you bought it. That must have made you buy it. May or may not. And it's called the last click attribution fallacy, and you have to, it's a much more complicated web, exactly as you described. And so I don't know if that last thing you clicked on actually made you buy it. And if I ask you, you don't know either. So the measurement is really tough.
Thank you, Rob.
I think there's a slight shift on the purpose of measurement. So in the past, a lot of the measurement in, certainly media measurement that I came across was business model driven. I mean, essentially, it was media justifying why they charge a ton of money to an agency who then charges a ton of money to a client who then tries to justify to their bosses why they spend all that money. So it was honestly, very business model driven. I mean, why else would free-to-air television succeed for so long? It's very, very wasteful, and it's very, very expensive. So there are reasons. There are other reasons. You can talk about brand sentiment, but at the end of the day, the measurement wasn't sophisticated enough to be able to justify why there was a better alternative. I think as time's gone by, it's not just a business model justification for the measurement. It's actually people trying to shift from sell towards serve the customer. There's a shift. A lot of the campaigns were very much, buy this product, it'll make you cool, handsome, sexy. And now it's a case of, how am I going to make your life better? How am I going to solve a problem that you had? And how do I shorten the gap between you discovering that message and actually transacting? Because one of the things we used to lose whenever we'd market a movie is a great trailer, but there's about 4 weeks before someone actually buys the ticket. How do you shorten the gap between someone's engagement with your brand and the actual transaction, and make it very service, solution-oriented? Remove the pain, remove the friction, make life a little bit better. And a lot of the storytelling and the creative work that people are doing is shifting towards that environment. Not everywhere, but a lot of people are trying to do that. The second part, I cannot, the more research that helps us better understand it, so we're going off science, not off gut, is the emotional connection for consumers. Hard to explain why, when I was at Disney, I had thousands of touch points to connect with a consumer. And it wasn't about a hard push, much as you may think it's a hard push. It wasn't a hard push. It was, how do we form an emotional connection? How do we create a reaction? How do we create a feeling with our engagement that makes that main office overrule the press office to say, we've got to have this product even though it's 3 times the price? And a lot of that was emotional communication, storytelling. And with all these fragmented platforms, I think that's even more important to be able to stand out. So I think there is, as you mentioned, the ocean aspects. The incumbent platforms find that very hard. They're not equipped with the tools and the data to gather that. The digital platforms are starting to gather that data. And I think if you can combine the science with the new digital platforms and start trying to add the emotional elements into the profile, then I think we're a step further. The other part is back to that human part. Even with the incredible tools that Chris and Pierre and the team are working on, I don't know whether a lot of people in the organizations are ready to do anything with it. So in digital, in the digital transformation of traditional companies or the new digital companies, we're finding that there's a culture shift towards change makers versus traditionalists. And that's uncomfortable for everybody. So you get this kind of uncomfortable resistance to adopting, even though it's pretty irrefutable. It's backed by thousands of studies, and it makes a ton of sense, and it would make you do your job better, but there's a resistance. It will pass. It's passed with every other technology we've introduced. But I think there are these kind of challenges that make it a little bit harder. But we absolutely need this measurement. The better we can get with the measurement, the better we can do our jobs. But it's not just about measuring the money, the business model. It's honestly, one of the hardest things in media is the consumer expectation has risen. Your expectation has risen. You're very, very hard to please now. And that's a good thing too, but it's much harder. So we need to have the tools to better understand you so we can better make you happy. And my colleagues at Pixar used to have a great kind of line. They said, happiness is the best business model. So if we can make you happy, you'll be much happier spending your money. So our focus should be on making you happy. Trust me, the money will follow.
Well, yeah.
I'm sorry, you mentioned just the culture change, whether on the client side or the agency side, is huge and can be an enormous obstacle. And there are two cognitive biases related to that. One, of course, is the status quo bias, which is faced with uncertainty, humans just stick with what they've got. We all know that, right? The other is the sunk cost fallacy, that once you've done something for a long time, invested time or money, the last thing you want to do is change or cut your losses on that. And so if you look at an industry, if you look at marketing as a function, and you think that for 75 years, they've basically done it the same way, and you walk in and go, well, Mr. or Ms. Executive Vice President, it's all wrong, and I want you to change based on science. Their reaction is likely going to be, your science is crap.
Wow. And I like what you say just on this happiness, but the brief problem, I think, is brands are more delivering joy than happiness. And that, I think it was looking at happiness on a long-term basis to really connect with consumers differently and potentially invent your new business model and look beyond what you are offering and selling today by working, of course, with people like you. So thank you guys for these inspiring thoughts. I think we all were very inspired, and all the great examples here are real. I'm very glad that Chris mentioned some of the good work we do here in Singapore, and the reason I wanted to get this panel in Singapore is that we really want to do more of behavior science at any level. So we already do a lot of behavior science in the segmentation space. We include some of the behavior science data in our new business model that we offer to our clients. We now design customer strategy based on behavior science, and I hope we will very soon crack new products with you some, so that we can really go up to that phase where we could design with you and our clients new product that really fits consumer needs. So thank you. Any question? I'd like to get a question from the room. Yes, I have one here. Maybe we will circulate the mic, but I know that let's limit to 5 questions if you're okay, because I'm sure that with these guys we can stay up to 9 o'clock.
That's another terrific use of behavioral science. Limited scarcity, only 5 questions.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, let's do. It's for you. You know, you just landed a few hours ago. You are going to be there until midnight.
Thank you. This is a bit of a combination of both a question and a comment. Little Britain, I don't know if you guys know the comedy series, has this line that says, the computer says no. And that's it. And the reason that finishes there, because the human can't tell anymore, and the computer can't say anymore. So you've already touched on this thing about the black box and everything. And the thing that to me is missing the most is context. You've touched on it, but context truly, how did you get there? Why is it relevant? Who are you to tell me what you think I am? I mean, it's not that I won't give you the data, it's that I don't trust you to be smart enough to tell me who I am. 80%, 20% error factor? And then you've got this thing, you've heard of Schilling, and Schilling says that with the minimum amount of information, you'll come to a common element. You guys are trending towards the Schilling of too much information, and you're going to dehumanize us. What do you think of that?
Yes.
Well done.
No, well, on the point of trust, first of all, everything that I do has to first go through a meta-analysis. In other words, I don't ever use any one-offs in science. I want to see reproducibility. So if you look at, for example, personality trait science, that is not Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs is not science. So don't confuse with that. It is a highly reproducible across hundreds of millions of respondents in more than 50 countries with huge predictive a value for choices in behavior. This is personality trait science I'm talking about now. Now, people from an ethical point of view should choose whether or not they want to give up that or anything else, in my view. In my Harvard Business Review article on it, in the rough ethics of it, I thought that one, if you are going, you need to tell people what you're doing, first of all. In other words, I'd like to give you a personality test. Are you okay with that? That's one, as opposed to anything surreptitious. Two, my interests or my client's interests need to be aligned with your best interests, not just to use it against you to push a fear button, for example, to trigger a vote. So I think there are ethics needed and probably have to be regulated, because I don't think the industry will do it on its own ethically. So for the question of who am I to tell you, actually at the end of the day, I can never tell you. I can only mirror back to you what you are or what you tell me explicitly or implicitly.
That's what I mean. You are telling me. You're making an assumption. You're being presumptive. Not having a shot at you.
No, it's fine. Here, take the mic, because it's important. Have a shot.
My best, maybe. No, what I'm trying to say is that the biggest, I mean, we do a lot of stuff in data. I actually work in the retail sphere, which is just before FMCG. So what we're seeing here is that too much of a good thing is exactly that. It's too much of a good thing. And the customer doesn't really know what he wants, so that's why he can't tell you. Right. I mean, he didn't know he wanted an iPod or a bloody Walkman or whatever the hell it is. And the thing that intrigued me is like sitting in a movie theater. My daughter and I were watching Rock and Roller. Here we are in Singapore watching Rock and Roller. We're the only guys that are laughing. So what are you going to do? Cut the movie to pieces because we're laughing and everybody, all the Asians aren't? I mean, you wouldn't do that. You just wouldn't show it.
Yeah. So I think back to Rob's point, when you're into a digital and IP domain as opposed to a broadcast or a collective, you can't do it in a collective. You can't do a movie for one person in a collective experience. And you had an interesting culture clash experience there with that. On the score of telling you, I don't want to be misunderstood on this. The personality trait science is not asking you to tell me your personality. It infers it through questions, and more, we've changed the methodology so that, for an example, conscientiousness is one of the 5 traits. If you ask somebody, are you really low on conscientiousness? You know, you're a slacker. Nobody's going to say, of course I am. And if they do, they probably really are, you know. But instead, we found if I show you photos and I say, which of these looks more like your sock drawer? How do you park your car? How often do you recycle or miss recycling? Do you floss your teeth? These are all tells for conscientiousness, which map back under testing to do that. So I think that the science is very, very robust. Now, all I'm going to do back to you, it's almost like Ulysses tying himself to the mast so that he won't die when the sirens sing. We as a species are very weak in terms of our own best interests, no matter what it is. So by knowing this about your personality, it's a way to coach you into protecting you from yourself. Not a nanny state, you. And so at its best, showing you that you have a problem with this, this, and this, if you are low on conscientiousness and high on neuroticism, you're probably going to have health problems. And so it's going to introduce ways as a kind of helpful coach to say, that's what you told me about you. You might want to look after yourself in these ways. So that's a positive way of doing it. A negative way, an unethical way, would be, that's what you told me about you. I'm going to serve you up an ad that scares the living you-know-what out of you. That would be unethical.
David Ogilvy famously said that the consumer is not a moron. She's your wife. And that,
More your husband, I hope.
Oh, your husband, yeah, right. And don't insult her intelligence. So we have been hearing also about how big data AI can be used to match, predict, profile, and foretell. But you touched something that's very interesting. Is there any way that we can use behavioral science to even deepen that so-called change you were just describing, using the system to rational thinking to get the consumer to completely recalibrate the system one automatic instinctive thinking. Thank you.
So great question. For those of you, what's your name? I'm sorry?
Todd.
Todd. He's referring to what the Nobel Prize winning scientist Daniel Kahneman, you can read his book, Thinking, Fast and Slow. He did not invent this, but he articulated it that the brain works at two levels. Thinking works at two levels, system one and system two. System one is very fast, intuitive, blink. It's just like if you were driving home and don't remember driving home, that's system one. And most, 90 to 95% of human decision making is system one. System two is effortful, deliberative, and it's a real energy suck. It takes a ton more energy than system one, which is why your brain does so much system one. Problem is, system one is not as accurate as system two. So why not just try to migrate everything over to system two? Well, first of all, from an evolutionary point of view, you'd be just dried out energy-wise. Your brain takes 20% of all your energy all the time, and that's using system one 95% of the time. So from an evolutionary point of view, you still haven't caught up to our environment. We are 40,000 years back. We are primed for speed of decision, not necessarily accuracy of decision. People under brain scanners who can easily get into deep system two thinking often are deep meditators and monks. Most of us not. So there have been tries of how do you get consumers to be more reflective, more thoughtful or mindful about their purchases. Show me one that works. So far, we're not wired for that, and under any stress or even relaxation, we just go whoom, right over to the system one automatic thinking. I don't know if you guys have that.
Hi. So I was just wondering, how okay is it for companies to use personalization as a basis for price discrimination? And I especially ask this because a lot of tech companies do it. And I'm especially asking this from a behavioral science point of view, where we know that fairness as a construct has like a very deep emotional impact. Nobody wants to be treated unfairly. So if a company is using personalization to justify price discrimination, is it okay, or does that cross a line?
So question about fairness. Fairness is not universal, it turns out. Some people interpret fairness as making sure everybody has an equal opportunity, a level playing field, as the saying goes. Other people think fairness is not allowing somebody to get something they did not earn.
Right.
Very different interpretations of fairness. Progressive versus regressive taxation.
Yeah.
If I said it is pricing differential for CBD, is that unfair when you're trying to manage traffic flow? So I don't think it's the morality of it needs to be looked in the context of the goals of doing that. Is it price gouging, or is it a means test? And if it's price gouging, well then, yeah, that would probably be unfair. So I don't see how it would hold up as a kind of only goal of I'll charge you more because I can charge you more. But then talk to Uber or Lyft, who can do surge pricing for everybody, and only those with more money will take it during surge pricing.
And I think, if I may, to add a point here, is that if you look at all the ethical AI frameworks that are actually, released by all the countries in the world, from Canada to Singapore, even China, is actually working on their own ethical frameworks. Fairness is one of the pillars, and there are many others. The privacy, the respect of the human autonomy, so that we can design AI in an ethical way. But I think what is missing and what needs to be considered is that most of these pillars are finally very different from a market to another one because of culture differences. If you just look at privacy versus convenience, or privacy versus safety, the people from Europe will not just consider privacy as important as convenience compared to the people living in China. Yep. So I'm actually doing that research to understand the cultural differences between on all those ethical pillars that are, most of them are the same. Fairness is in any ethical frameworks. From Canada to Singapore, you have this notion. Of course, now the question is, because AI is universal, because it just looks beyond the borders, we would need to consider this cultural shift and the cultural differences because this is universal.
Very few people in the plane, even in the same class, pay the same price for the ticket. And yet we probably all know that.
Yeah.
So probably an aspect of it is transparency.
Yeah.
That if we all know there's dynamic pricing, depending on time and load factors and stuff, we're like, sucks for me. It's the hiding it that probably is the problem.
Yeah.
Thank you. So my question, the things that I've taken out this evening, firstly, the thought that purchase decisions are emotional, and secondly, the point there's an emotional data gap, as we were talking about with Amazon Video. It's something that lots of companies are trying to learn. So if there is this gap, are machines the right way to go about closing the gap, or can we revert to human conversation as a valuable way of looking to close the gap and meet our needs when it comes to market research or behavioral science or whatever it might be?
I'll have a simplistic media owner's approach to that. I'll leave the experts to comment. Any form of data is useful to me. Any form of data is useful. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but he hasn't said that there is only one form of gathering of the data. It's the data goes in, and what they've developed is great scientific techniques to better analyze the data, better use that data to help us understand a personality profile. And so whenever people are trying to do predictive algorithms in the entertainment companies, there's a whole bunch of different bits of data that they have. They have sales data, they have expressed preferences in surveys, although they're quite slow and sometimes out of date. So any form of gathering that data is kind of useful. I think what's valuable is to say that the tools we have at our disposal now in gathering that, even in conversations. So remember earlier on we were saying in conversations that what people say they want and what they actually want are two different things. I was at Cartoon Network for a number of years, and the head of programming there was a very cool guy who said, I love the research, I listen to it all, I read it all, I get every bit of information, and then I do my own thing. but because he's better informed to do his own thing, because he had those conversations, but he does not take them literally. And so I think if you forget the entire kind of conversational piece, then I think you're missing a potential data set. But if you can gather that in a very automated way, if you can use tools to analyze the neurolinguistic programming, to analyze the facial motions. Actually, some of my research team used to physically attend as many of the focus groups as possible, because it wasn't the words that were documented, it was the expressions on people's faces. There's a great US philosopher and poet, Maya Angelou. She says, people forget what you say, they forget what you do, but they never forget how you make them feel. And so, the tools are getting better to do that kind of analytics. So yes, I personally believe we need a lot more of that face-to-face, but there's some amazing tools now to feed into the data set, and we can do better things with it, rather than a bunch of people writing PowerPoint presentations that take 9 months.
And also the other way is like to collaborate with another company who has one piece of data and you have the other piece of data, and that way you complete the puzzle and both of us can use that data set together.
Thank you. I guess just one last point, just I'd be interested to hear what you think. Do you think that if we rely too much on the data as the one way of being able to understand what someone is saying is true or not, is that going to affect our relationships in real life when we start to take everything at face value and don't look for small signs in body language about whether somebody is perhaps lying or telling the truth?
While we slag off intuition and slag off all cognitive biases and so-called heuristics, which are these fast blink rules of thumb, many of them are there for a reason through evolution. They worked because they're shortcuts. And so we know from watching somebody whether they're interested or whether I've just bored them with my response. Right? And I didn't have to do the data on that, to your point. I could read that. We could, perhaps, through a company like Affectiva or others, actually code their pupillary dilation, their micromusculature, their eyebrows, and say, she was bored by what you just replied. That doesn't, negate all the powers of human intuition. I think the flaws in intuition is that we attribute far more power of accuracy to intuition than we truly have. Unfortunately, we're often just wrong.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, is you individually, having been in the industry for the last 25, 10, 20 years, what do you think will happen 20 years from now? And what do you see you personally being in making a difference in this field?
Right. So I'm sure what is not definitely going to happen is the machines taking over the world. Currently, when I go and pitch to my customers, one of the first extreme reactions that they have is the vision, what the Hollywood movies have taught them of the Terminators taking over the world. So the first thing I tell them, yeah, I'm not here to take a youth job with an AI solution. What the future will be that human and AI will be coexisting together. And AI today is still evolving. There is a lot way to go even when it comes to the creative part of it. AI is able to generate new designs, new music, new art in millions of numbers. But at some point of time, human brain overrides the AI brain, where the final decision, the strategic decision is taken by the humans. So what we'll essentially see is that we as human beings will be focusing on tasks which is much more enriching compared to the repetitive and the boring task which will be taken over by the machines.
I personally think that we are going to move, I hope, we are going to move to a chapter where people will be re-empowered with their data, which is going to reverse the relationship they have with their brands. I believe that if we educate properly the citizen, any of us, on the importance of our data, and if we empower them with the right platform so that they can better manage their data and the consent they give to anyone, brands, public entities, research company, hospital, and if eventually we can move to a chapter where they would be rewarded for the data they share at some point, which also require to have potentially an AI that regulates a bit, the reattribution model. So who is going to make the money out of this data that finally the people will share more and more? I think that it can reverse a lot, relationship between brand and consumers. And I truly hope we are going to live in a world where I would say, if I am looking for my next trip, my next holidays, I'm going to say, for this, I'm ready to share this data, this data, this data. And what the brands would have to do is try to bring me the offer that not only fit with only my financial expectation, but with my emotional expectation, to serve me, to deliver me the holidays I would love to really spend. And maybe this is not the cheapest one. Maybe it's a week, in Africa, which costs potentially 500 more, but that really is going to deliver everything I like. And it's going to be based on my data.
I think many of the things we're talking about now we'll have worked through a lot of them. So our comfort with sharing data will be a lot more comfortable in 20 years' time. We'll still have concerns, but we'll be a lot more comfortable because it'll become a lot more routine. The ethics around AI and use of AI and on big data will be more established, more globally accepted, we'll be more comfortable with it. We won't have solved everything, these are kind of current transitionary issues. I don't think we'll be talking about certain industry sectors. I don't think we'll be talking about advertising as a sector. I don't know even why we're still talking about it now as a sector. I'm a big believer brands, what's your favorite? Making brands matter. Ogilvy should still be here because brands will still matter. Okay, so I still believe that brands are a lot more than just a bunch of marketing people spending money to drive a sale. I think that's totally selling brands short. As someone who had passionate brands like Disney and Marvel, I can assure you there's a lot more that goes into the thinking than just sell, sell, sell. It's about experiences. I think the other part that's happening and already happening now, but it's going to happen even more over the next kind of 20 years, will be the convergence of systems. I know it sounds ecosystems. When I started in the media industry, I called it a value chain. We don't talk value chains anymore. We talk ecosystems. And so everything's connected, whether it's Grab or Gojek or Tencent and Alibaba. And actually, the reason I'm mentioning a lot of Chinese companies there is over the next 20 years, the population is going to grow and there's a lot more economic spending power in this part of the world, which is why I'm here and why I'll stay here. And there's a great book, if you want to read it, called The Future is Asian by Parag Khanna. Which talks about the growth, and it's a very multi-plural future, but the point is a lot of the development is going on in this part of the world, and it's very ecosystem-driven from the beginning, data-driven from the beginning. Individual consumers on a mass scale, the largest mass countries, the two are in this region, already there. So if you think about 20 years from now, those systems will be far more prevalent. TikTok is now, one of the largest global app systems in the shortest possible time. And so we'll get more comfortable with data, we'll get more comfortable with the platforms, and we'll get more comfortable with what we share. It won't look like the Hollywood movies, but maybe watch the Chinese movies. That'll probably be closer to what it'll actually be.
I'm always amazed at how many predictions go wrong or are overblown, and very few, if any, come out right for a 20-year period. So I can't imagine a single prediction I could make with any confidence at all for 20 years, other than I will look a lot worse than I do now. But I think when you see the programming shifts, I mean, Rob and I were here in the really pioneering days of multi-channel TV. It was pre-digital TV, with satellites like Palapa, And who would have thought that there was this huge renaissance of programming, particularly scripted programming. And I think the big thing we've learned is never project from where you are to the future. Because in the middle of the height of reality show programming, the prediction was that's all that's ever going to be left. There's never going to be another scripted program on air ever again. And of course, we saw what's happened with all the wonderful scripted programming. So I think we tend to make false predictions. We go a little bit, in circles in these things. I had asked the Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman, if we become more aware of these so-called biases, these cognitive biases. For example, the polarization you see in the United States right now is the confirmation bias mixed with identity. That's a toxic combination. And yet, imagine you were to train every young child and middle schooler and high schooler and collegian about our biases so that they would develop empathy and say, God, I'm not going to act so hateful towards this person because I understand how different we are. So I asked Daniel Kahneman, if we all become more self-aware of our biases, won't we become a little bit more open-minded and empathetic? And he replied, no. Unfortunately, self-awareness does not change us when it comes to these biases. So I think we're going to see versions of what we've seen. We'll see them faster, we'll see them in oddities in some cases, but no doubt we're going to see some twisted form of reality programming and some beautiful forms of scripted programming. And the last thing I would do is believe anything projecting from today that will endure for 20 years. I just don't think it will. And with children that I talk to, parents of friends of mine's children, and they say, what should they study? And I say, liberal arts. And they laugh at me, and I go, particularly in Asia, where people, frankly, I've interviewed for Western schools in Asia on behalf of the schools, and they want to know that they're going to get trained for a job at Goldman Sachs or a doctor. And I just look at and I say, listen, as capitalistic as you want to be, look at the giant companies that exist today. Never were there 10, 15 years ago. You couldn't have trained for that. You couldn't have predicted that. The only thing you could do is train for agility, to be able to connect dots and transpose keys. So I think that 20 years from now, we'll be better at transposing keys and connecting dots as an entire species.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, all of you. And wish you all a very nice evening. And if some of you want to just connect now with us. We are staying here a few minutes. Thank you.
Stop Facebook post. Go to Sun, then press N. Yeah.